It is very hard when the closest people betray your trust. These are the people you count on and trust. It's one thing when one close person lets you down, but it's quite another when several are plotting against you at once. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened to me, and it took me a long time to recover from the betrayal. Family is something to cherish because it is irreplaceable. I do not know where this statement came from, but I consider it indisputably true. Personally, if I had the opportunity, I would not hesitate to part with most of my relatives. Let me clarify a bit. I was the youngest of 3 siblings, and although some believe that the youngest child is often preferred, my parents did not seem to receive such a memo. Despite our family's financial resources, I was constantly receiving the least attractive food. I was assigned the most undesirable household chores, and I was the only recipient of hand-me-down clothes. This may seem like an exaggeration, but a good example is that I didn't try a piece of white meat chicken for dinner until my older sister left for college when I was 14. Back when there were no TV remotes, I was always assigned to switch TV channels in the family. Wherever I was in the house, I was always the one who had to answer the call to change the channel before the start of the desired program. It was almost like a modern version of Cinderella and her stepsisters. But everything changed when Susan Marsden came into my life. One day, my brother Wayne and I watched as a moving truck pulled up to the Johnsons' old house 3 houses away from us. A dark blue Chevrolet station wagon was parked in front of it, from which a man, a woman, a boy, and a blonde, blue-eyed girl got out. My heart was pounding, sweat stood out on my forehead, and my stomach rumbled, a feeling that would become all too familiar in the years to come. Jeffy and the blonde were sitting in a tree, kissing. First comes love, then comes marriage, then Jeffy pushes the baby carriage, Wayne sang playfully. At the age of 8, I still didn't fully understand the meaning of the rhyme, but I knew enough to be embarrassed by Wayne's hint that I had fallen in love with the new girl. No boy my age wanted to admit it, even if the girl looked like a blonde-haired, blue-eyed angel. Girls were considered untouchable. Despite the confusion in my head, I couldn't bring myself to admit this to my annoying 10-year-old brother. Wayne was noticeably bigger and heavier than me, which meant that I wouldn't stand a chance in a fight despite my previous unsuccessful attempts. But I was determined not to appear weak in front of the most amazing girl I'd ever met. Eddie and Susan Marsden, aged 12 and 8 respectively, were the only children on our block, so my siblings and I often spent a lot of time with them. Susan and I used to play together a lot because we were the same age. She had a fighting personality and, like me, she was great at throwing baseballs and footballs. Our friendship quickly developed, and in a short time, we became best friends. Despite the fact that Susan had made connections with other girls in our rural town, we continued to trust each other until the end of the 8th grade. Although we had never kissed by that time, we often held hands, whether at school or in public places. Teasing male friends about my crush on her, I hid it, secretly enjoying it. In my eyes, Susan was the most beautiful girl in town, and she never stopped making my heart beat faster. But when the school year came to an end, my world seemed to collapse. Josh Archer, the quarterback of our freshman football team, invited Susan to prom, and she gladly agreed. This news made me feel completely overwhelmed like I had never felt in my young life. I thought we were in a relationship, I whispered when she started talking about her date, trying to contain my emotions. Well, you've never officially asked me to be your girlfriend. And besides, he's just a senior and the quarterback of the freshman football team, she said in a happy tone. Yes, of course, I said, moving away from her and the group of giggling girls. As I was entering my house, feeling empty, my brother came up to me. He looked like he was going to give wise advice, as befitted the knowledgeable sophomore he pretended to be. The blonde beat you up pretty good, didn't she? He taunted, using an expletive that made our mother turn her head. Even Wayne's punishment for swearing didn't ease the pain of losing my girlfriend. Mom tried to comfort me by saying it was just one date and didn't mean Susan didn't like me anymore. As if I could believe it. I avoided going to Susan's house, and she didn't come to me during the week leading up to the freshman party. I resisted the urge to stay outside to see her when Josh Archer's father came to pick her up. Susan looked great, my brother said when he returned home shortly after Mr. Archer left. For the rest of the school year and the summer, Susan and I kept our distance. We exchanged waves, but neither of us took the first step to start a conversation. I couldn't deny it, I felt miserable. She seemed to have withdrawn into herself, and I was still stuck in the past. I hardly talked to other girls and spent most of my time playing baseball during the day and basketball in the evenings. I was pretty good at sports, and doing it helped me take my mind off Susan. My brother made it his mission to keep me up to date on her dates, always breaking the news to me when she was seeing someone new. My parents repeatedly noted Susan's absence from our family gatherings. My brother was happy to talk about how he saw her with different guys, and my sister Diana often stood up for me, pointing out that my brother himself did not particularly like ladies. "I'm thinking of asking Blondie out on a date," my brother said, noticing her friendliness towards me and readily offering. "If she agreed to go on a date with you, you'd regret it," I warned with annoyance. But focusing on my brother, I did not expect a sudden slap from my father, which fell on my face and head, almost causing me to fall off my chair. "You're lucky you're too far away for me to reach you," my father warned my brother sternly. "But let me be clear, if I catch you joking with Susan, there will be consequences, and they won't be mild." "Yes, sir," Wayne grumbled back. The beginning of my first year of high school was amazing. Previously, most of the girls except Susan did not pay attention to me, but now I was the center of attention since every attractive freshman was interested in getting to know me better. Over the summer, I grew up and gained weight. My long dark brown curly hair and big brown eyes gave me a decent look. I found that there were advantages to not being around Susan all the time. At first, I was surprised by the attention the freshman girls gave me, but to be honest, I liked it. I went on dates with several girls, but in the end, I chose as my girlfriend a petite, charming red-haired girl with striking green eyes. Erin Griffin was always full of energy, and it was nice to be with her. She earned a place in the freshman support group, and her attractive smile and full lips made every kiss with her delightful. Everything seemed to be going well in life. 2 days after the Christmas dance, my mother brought Susan to my room and told me that a guest had come to see me, asking me to keep the door open. Susan and I both blushed. "Jeff, I need to confess something. Last year, I made the mistake of going on a date with another guy while we were together, but I was too scared to tell you," she said. "Since then, I've dated a few other guys and realized that you're the best. I want us to be together again." When Susan came into the room, I was sitting on the bed, immersed in a book. While she was talking, I sat motionless, taking my time to think about her words. After a short pause, I nodded in agreement. "If we move forward," I began firmly, "then we should have no room for doubt. You're my girlfriend, which means you can't have any relationship with another guy, no flirting, no kissing, nothing like that. If I find out about something suspicious, it will be over forever." "I understand," she whispered back. "First of all, I have to end my relationship with Erin. She's an amazing girl, and I have strong feelings for her," I confessed. "I saw how close you were at the Christmas dance. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I should have been there with you and not with some other girl," she replied. Erin took the news better than I expected. I knew that I was to blame for the breakup with her, but Susan and I quickly restored our relationship. When we were walking together, I couldn't resist kissing her and running my hand over her arm. Each time, it made her raise an eyebrow, after which she quickly smiled. She was not only my partner in every sense of the word, but also my best friend. Despite the fact that other guys were trying to get her attention, I knew that she remained loyal to me. We decided to go to the University of Wisconsin-Madison together. In our freshman year, we lived on the same floor in the same dorm. For the next 3 years, we lived together in an off-campus apartment. Although our parents were aware of our living situation and did not quite agree with it, they mostly treated it with understanding. Susan had to assure her parents that she would continue to use contraceptives until graduation. We got married after our sophomore year, and our parents organized a beautiful wedding for us. Everything went smoothly until the very end of the celebration when Wayne made the mistake of inappropriately touching my wife while we were dancing to a slow song at our wedding. Even though I was on the other side of the room, I quickly intervened, took his hand away, and hit him on the lips. "Oh," he exclaimed as blood gushed from his gums. "I've already warned you, you idiot, never touch my wife," I shouted as the audience rushed to separate us. After he came to his senses, the rest of the wedding went smoothly. I decided not to focus on the fact that my wife never interfered when my brother touched her from behind. After graduating from university, Susan and I moved back to our hometown. I got a job as an editor for a small magazine group, and Susan worked for a nonprofit organization until we decided to start a family. With the arrival of our children, she became a stay-at-home mom supported by my income. I understood that I would not receive a large salary, but I was grateful for the opportunity to provide for my family. My troubled brother became less problematic when he moved to California a year later with his wife, with whom he lived for 2 years. Known for his conversational skills, he excelled at a job in television advertising sales. My mother told me that he had achieved great success, living in a luxurious house in a posh neighborhood. I was genuinely happy for him, although I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief knowing that our meetings would be rare. Time, as it often happens, flew by quickly. After 2 years of marriage, Marianne appeared in our lives, becoming the center of my world. 2 years later, Will joined our family, adding to it. Even at the age of 38, Susan continued to fascinate me. Her presence still stirred my heart. We shared a passion for fitness, and I couldn't stop admiring her figure, which looked as beautiful as it did during our wedding. Despite having given birth to 2 children, she even seemed prettier, and her breasts became a little fuller. Her hips and buttocks had slightly increased in curve. She had turned into a more mature version of herself, and I was grateful that she belonged to me. The news from Mom was heartbreaking. Despite the fact that my brother has never smoked, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, and according to doctors, he has about 2 years left to live. Apparently, he suffered from symptoms for several months, not paying attention to them until he couldn't cope with them on his own anymore. By this point, Wayne had already gone through 2 marriages and a divorce. Both of his ex-wives had difficulty coming to terms with his infidelity, but the positive thing was that they did not have children together. The luxurious house he owned was lost during the divorces, and now he lived alone in a modest 2-room apartment in a not very prosperous area. Despite a successful career, it was obvious that Wayne would need help in the coming days, and Mom had several suggestions on how we could all support him together. The following Sunday, she held a family meeting at our parents' house, hoping that Susan, Diana, Ronnie, and I would be present. Many important decisions were discussed at the meeting. Wayne made it clear that he wanted to stay in his house as long as possible, although it was difficult for those who had to help him since the rest of the family lived far away. After much discussion, it was decided that the 3 women in the family, my mother, sister, and wife, would take turns living with Wayne and helping him. Since my wife was unemployed and her children were old enough to help around the house, Susan took turns staying with Wayne every 4 weeks, which essentially allowed her to spend twice as much time as my sisters and mother. In contrast, my working mother and sister took turns staying with us for 2 weeks at a time. According to the schedule, Diana stayed for 2 weeks, and Susan stayed for 4. My mother would stay with us for 2 weeks, then she would stay with Susan for 4 weeks, after which the cycle would start again. I was surprised by such a detailed schedule and asked my wife about it. "I know you have more leeway since you don't work, but you also have 2 children to take care of at home," I said. "Marianne can now drive a car and help take Will to sports training and other events," she replied. "The 3 of you will have to be more efficient when I'm not at home. I will have to be more organized in the future. We have to support Wayne as a family," she said firmly. I couldn't disagree, even though I knew that the main burden would fall on me. Despite the difficulties, Wayne was family. The children and I would find a way to adjust. We communicated with Wayne via video link from our parents' living room. His gratitude to the women who offered to help brought us all to tears. It was like we were in a heartwarming scene from a movie on the Hallmark Channel. Before Susan left for her first shift in California, the kids and I gathered for a family meeting. We all knew Wayne needed help, and the kids promised to assist while Susan was away. In addition, Susan took the time to prepare a few dishes in advance before leaving for Wayne's. "I appreciate everything you do for the family, dear," I expressed my gratitude to Susan. "Don't fall for his manipulations and don't believe his lies," I advised her. She nodded tearfully and walked through the airport gates. While Susan was on her first shift in California, the kids and I kept in touch with her every day. She assured us that Wayne was fine and still able to handle most responsibilities. When she returned, the 3 of us eagerly went to the airport to meet her. The 2 weeks she spent at home passed quickly, and before we knew it, she was back in California. She was cooking for us again, and the four of us enjoyed spending time together. When she was around, it seemed that our family had become even more united. During a conversation with Susan during her second shift in California, it seemed to me that something was wrong, although I couldn't figure out what exactly. I didn't want to ask the kids if they felt it too. Susan seemed distracted during our conversation, which led me to believe that Wayne's condition was deteriorating faster than we had anticipated. My wife was very worried about the situation. I convinced her many times that we could make a difference if it got too hard for her. "No, it's okay. Sometimes I just need to remember how lucky we are to have each other," Susan said. "Wayne doesn't have a wife or kids, and he was alone except for us and our mom when we were around. It must be very difficult," she said. We did a great job of managing during Susan's absence. The household was running relatively well, but it was difficult for me to adjust to the fact that my partner and best friend would not be around every day. Susan's absence also meant a lack of intimacy. In the month of her absence, our physical connection had dropped from 3 times a week to 0. I couldn't help but wonder if she felt this absence as much as I did. When I went to pick Susan up from the airport for the second time, I even thought about booking a hotel room so that we could be intimate before heading home. By the time I got to the airport, the desire was so strong that I had difficulty finding a comfortable position in my jeans. Looking forward to meeting my wife after 2 months of separation, I felt incredibly tense in the car. I had to calm down a bit before heading into the airport, fearing that strong feelings might overwhelm me. When she finally appeared at the gate, dressed simply in jeans and a blouse, she seemed as stunning as if she were wearing a ball gown. I couldn't help but notice the fatigue in her demeanor as she approached me, but my excitement overshadowed all my fears. It was only when she sluggishly returned my kiss that I began to suspect something was wrong. Pulling away, I couldn't help but notice the weariness in her eyes. It occurred to me that my brother's health problems were most likely putting a lot of pressure on her, even if she didn't express it openly. Another selfish thought flashed through my mind, but I quickly pushed it aside. The excitement I had felt earlier dissipated when I gave Susan a ride home. Our conversations were minimal, and a sense of awkwardness hung between us. When we arrived home, the children immediately surrounded their mother, easing the tension between us. For the next hour, they chatted with her, and her tired smile assured them that everything was fine, at least in their eyes. After putting the kids to bed, I went over to Susan and asked how she was feeling. "How is taking care of Wayne? Is it getting too hard for you physically or mentally?" I asked. To my surprise, she looked more energetic than usual. "What's on your mind, Jeff? Do you think I can't handle this?" she asked. "I'm just a little tired from sitting at the airport for hours and the long flight, but I have everything under control. Mom and Diana came to pick up Wayne," she snapped. "Okay, no problem. I understand. You just look tired, that's all I meant," I replied, getting up from my seat and heading to the kitchen, pretending to want a drink. Knowing that I had work the next day, I went to bed at 11 o'clock, trying to convince Susan to join me for reasons I thought were understandable but apparently not clear enough because she told me that she planned to stay up a little longer. My jaw probably dropped to the floor when she said that. After a month of being alone, I found myself craving intimacy, but Susan seemed uninterested. It was clear that something was wrong. The next evening, after getting a good night's sleep, my wife seemed to be in a better mood. She cooked a lovely dinner and seemed more cheerful, but something in her smile was not quite right. We had intimate moments in bed that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't fully present. It made me wonder if she really cared. I wasn't the only one who noticed the change in Susan's behavior. On Friday, Marianne suggested a walk after dinner. As we were walking, she asked me, "Dad, what's going on with Mom? It seems that something is wrong. Did you do something?" I understood what Marianne was getting at. I didn't get an answer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the only problem I had was just being myself. "Uncle Wayne's health seems to be deteriorating rapidly, and I think your mom may be struggling with depression and having difficulty communicating with us," I suggested. My daughter is perceptive, and my words didn't seem to have completely calmed her down. "Do you think she might have developed feelings for Uncle Wayne? Their bond has become even stronger because of his illness." I noticed that she was chatting with him on the phone, and her behavior resembled that of a teenager in love. When he called her, she didn't seem to notice my presence, and her giggles and flirtatious comments were quite disturbing. They are not exactly suitable for a married woman. What should we do in this situation? To be honest, I'm not sure, I admitted. If it's just a temporary infatuation caused by their relationship, I can ignore it. But if it goes much deeper, then I adhere to traditional values when it comes to marriage obligations, Marianne. If she breaks these vows, it could turn into trouble for us. I pray she doesn't do it. Dad, I don't want you to go through a divorce, but I'll understand if she crosses that line, Marianne said. Susan seemed almost glad to be heading back to California the next Sunday. I experienced a combination of relief and irritation. In the 2 weeks that she was at home after a month apart, we were close only 6 times. Our connection, both in and out of the bedroom, was lacking, and it seemed that we were more like friends with privileges. As she headed for the exit, I suggested that she consider hiring professional help for Wayne if it got too hard for Mom or Diana. I reminded her that we need her for the family and she shouldn't leave us for Wayne. In response, she snapped back, "How dare you? I'm working hard to take care of your brother, and you're sitting back. You may think I'm selfish, but I'm not stupid. If I get too involved with Wayne, it could damage our marriage," she reasoned. The next evening, I talked to my parents about my concerns. Unfortunately, my mother dismissed my concerns and even called me an egoist when I said that I would not allow my brother to interfere in my marriage, even if he found himself in a difficult situation. I felt uneasy. "Jeff, you can't be serious about this," Mom insisted. "He's your brother, and she's your wife, and you take care of both of them." "But is it true, Mom?" I asked. "Is my love for them really that deep?" My mother's answer disappointed me, but my father's indifference did not surprise me. He always preferred my brother, even in adulthood. My affection for Susan has not waned since childhood, although I suspected that she had crossed all boundaries in her relationship with my brother. My feelings for her made me give her credit, even if it was a test for my self-esteem. Perhaps someone would consider this self-esteem, but regardless of the label, I was determined to maintain my integrity and self-esteem. My daughter was ready to help me with my plan. She secretly took Susan's keys while she was at home and made a duplicate. I planned to visit my brother's house without warning. I was ready to stay there for a long time if necessary to personally verify the truth of what was happening. I decided to wait 2 weeks after my wife left for California before joining her. Arriving at Wayne's house in a rented car, I got there at 2 in the morning with a small glimmer of hope, although deep down, I knew what I would find. I found them both asleep in Wayne's bed. In a fit of anger, I poured a pan of cold water over their heads, which made them scream in shock, trying to cover their naked bodies. As soon as they saw me standing with the phone, their screams quickly turned into threats. "If you weren't dying, I would have killed you," I shouted to my brother. "And as for you, Susan, if you can understand, we're done. You don't have to come home after your month is over. You can stay here with him until he dies." Susan, tears streaming down her face, tried to cover herself with her hands, but it was pointless. "Really, Susan," I said firmly. "You should have shown more modesty before sleeping with my despicable brother." "I'm so sorry, Jeff," she whimpered. "But he's dying, and I thought I was offering him comfort. He's a family member, so I thought it was acceptable." I chuckled mockingly. "If you wanted to comfort him that way, you should have hired an escort instead of acting like a. I'm not promiscuous. He's a family member. It was the right thing to do, even your mom agreed." "My mom? Did she think it was a good idea?" I exclaimed. "Yes. She, Diana, and I discussed what to do for Wayne. It was decided that he would not be able to do this for a long time, so we started last month," my wife explained. "So you, Diana, and Mom agreed on this without informing me, your husband, to whom you promised to be faithful many years ago? If the idea was really brilliant, why was I kept in the dark? You were going to tell me about it, weren't you?" Wayne seemed to have chosen the perfect moment to give me his opinion. "Don't worry, Jeff, your wife is amazing and great in bed," my brother chimed in. "The reason no one told you about this is because you're difficult to deal with, and we all knew you wouldn't react properly. Unfortunately, we were right. Have you completely devoted yourself to this clever plan? That's great, I said. The one who cheats gets a say, but not the faithful husband who remains in the dark? Well, you're right. It doesn't suit me to share a wife. You can take her away. I will find another one who will be faithful to me. No, Jeff, it's not forever. Wayne is dying. Please show compassion, Susan begged. Are you kidding me, woman? I replied incredulously. I showed compassion by letting him take care of himself for a month instead of sleeping with him like some woman. Stop calling me that. I'm not promiscuous, she countered. You are having an affair with a man who is not your husband. That's what I call promiscuity, even if you disagree with it, I objected. What difference does it make what he thinks? Wayne interjected. I think you're a wonderful daughter-in-law. Susan and Wayne put on their robes, and she started changing the wet sheets. And how long has this been going on? I asked my wife. I realized that she was trying to soften the blow somehow. Lying had never been her strong suit, at least not in the past. We started a relationship in the last month of my stay here. He doesn't have much time left, Jeff, she pleaded, tears welling up in her eyes. Please spare me the innocent pretense. We all know that you are unfaithful and he is a liar. That's enough, I muttered. Throughout the entire argument, my brother stood aside with a smug expression on his face, as if he had the key to life's greatest mystery in his hands. While Susan was fiddling with the sheets and the washing machine, he took the opportunity to make a snide remark, believing that I would not answer a man on his deathbed. You know, buddy, she's really something in bed, he said. And it wasn't difficult for me to convince her to stay in my room. Do you know why? Because I could. I won, Jeff. I won. You've been insufferable all your life, Wayne. There's nothing surprising in the fact that lying on your deathbed you will become even more unbearable. I wish you nothing but eternal damnation. Enjoy the time you have left if you can, despicable person. I left the house and headed to the airport to catch a flight home. Before 8 in the morning, I was lying on the couch in the family room when my kids came in. I stood up and hugged each of them. Since you returned so early, it means that everything did not go as planned, Marian expressed her disappointment, exclaiming, I really hoped that my parents would stay together until I graduate from high school. She seemed to believe her brother, and he nodded understandingly. I'm really sorry, Will. I should have talked to you about it too. I was hoping you wouldn't notice what was going on, and I wouldn't have to explain, I confessed. I've loved her for so long. Is that true, Dad? Aren't you going to forgive her? My son asked. Marriage and fidelity are complicated concepts, Will. When one partner betrays the other, a simple apology will not get rid of the pain and betrayal. It's like committing a serious offense and then apologizing. The damage has already been done, so how sincere are the apologies? She broke my heart, destroyed my trust, and disrespected me. Just apologizing is not enough. I've made that clear. The pain reflected in his eyes showed that he understood what I was talking about. Nowadays, children seem to grow up fast. Given that the divorce rate exceeds 50%, it's likely that he knows many peers whose parents are no longer together. How about pizza for dinner tonight? I don't feel like cooking, I suggested. They both nodded in agreement. While we were eating a large pizza with pepperoni and sausage, I opened up to my children and told them everything. Of course, tears were shed, and I admit that many of them were my own. I also took the opportunity to tell my children about the dishonesty of their mother and uncle. To my surprise, they were just as shocked and angry as I was. I couldn't help but notice that neither my mother nor my sister made a single attempt to apologize or explain the situation. I was sure Susan had already talked to both of them. I expected a quick and decisive reaction from the women in my family. The next day, I wasted no time in setting up an appointment with the lawyer I had contacted before going to California. I had a premonition of what I would find at my brother's house, and this trip was only supposed to confirm it. Although I secretly hoped that I was wrong, deep down, I knew that it was unlikely. It's like trying to make a quick movement in front of a mirror and hoping that it doesn't catch all the details, although it always does. It may seem ridiculous, but that was the reality we all faced. A similar situation had occurred before, hadn't it? That evening, Mom was the first to reach out to her sister, but her words sounded more like an attack than an apology. It seemed that the women decided to take an aggressive stance as a defense mechanism. "He's seriously ill, Jeff. She's just trying to comfort him these days," my mother insisted when I answered the phone. "And don't forget that he's a family member, not a stranger," she added. "She's my wife, Mom," I replied firmly. I was shouting into the phone, feeling a surge of anger. She had no right to do what she did. Perhaps you could have intervened, but instead, you and Diana encouraged her to give Wayne something that was meant only for me, without even discussing it with me. He has been in love with her since childhood. It wasn't a favor, Mom. His illness did not give him the right to her love. Mom sighed. When I first swore this to her, I used an unusual tone. I foresaw that there would be even more swearing in the future. "Don't you dare use that language," she said before I hung up. I didn't think she was capable of lecturing me. As soon as I finished talking, the phone rang again. "How dare you?" I turned off the phone again but immediately got another call. This time, there was silence on the other end. "Maybe old habits can be changed, Jeff," she asked cautiously. "You're not going to hang up on me again, are you?" "I have new rules, Mom," I replied. "If you try to lecture me, I'll hang up on you. You lost that right when you encouraged my wife to cheat on me with my brother, all because he's dying. You're my mother, for God's sake. You shouldn't encourage my wife to cheat on me, even with my dying brother. What kind of mother would do that to her own son?" "But he's on his deathbed," she exclaimed, suddenly flushing with renewed vigor. "To hell with him, to hell with him, to hell with him," I shouted back. "His impending death does not justify the fact that he ruined my marriage. It doesn't excuse her betrayal, and it doesn't excuse you and Diana for condoning her actions. This situation won't ruin your marriage if you don't let it happen. He's going to leave us soon, and you and Susan can start over with a clean slate. You don't even have to think about him," she said. "But he will always haunt my thoughts, and maybe Susan's too," I objected. "Is there really no place in your heart for forgiveness?" Mom asked. "No, it's not left," I admitted. "Would you forgive Dad so easily if he had an affair with Belinda Parker?" "Belinda Parker? The blonde who lived across the street when you were kids?" I heard the excitement in my mother's voice at the mention of Belinda's name. As a teenager, I remember how the beautiful Belinda Parker and her husband moved into the house across the street. Belinda, who was about 10 years younger than my mother, often attracted my father's attention when she walked to the mailbox in her tiny bikini in the summer. At the mention of Belinda, my mother made snide remarks at the dinner table, probably because of my father's obvious admiration for our younger neighbor. "If Belinda was on her deathbed, would you let my dad sleep with her?" I asked. "That's a ridiculous comparison," she snapped. "It's not that simple," I replied softly. 2 days later, my sister called and apologized, which comforted me. "It's a pity that I didn't notice this sooner," Diana admitted. "We all got caught up in Wayne's disease and made the wrong choice. Even though we're a family, I shouldn't have supported Susan's betrayal just because Wayne was sick." Ronnie was furious when I told him about Susan's actions, which were carried out with the approval of my mother and me. Since then, he has not spoken politely to me and even suggested that hitting me would be justified. "It looks like I'm going to have to put in a lot of effort to regain his trust," she lamented. An hour later, Ronnie called and sincerely apologized for his sister's behavior. "I had no idea, Jeff. I'm really sorry. If I had known, I would never have supported such stupidity." "What are you going to do now?" he asked. "I've made my decision, Ron." Despite Wayne's attempts to seduce her, Susan maintained control over her actions. Using his illness as an excuse was just that, an excuse. Despite pressure from Diana, Mom, and her sister, Susan eventually decided to forgive Wayne without asking my permission. This was not a one-time case because she had been involved with him for the past 2 months. Ronnie assured me that he would support me no matter what decision I made. I waited until Susan's plane took off before I contacted her parents. I had to tell her parents about what their daughter was doing in California with my brother. As expected, they were shocked and ashamed when they found out the truth. "Is this some kind of sick joke, Jeff?" her father shouted over the phone. "No, Dad. I wouldn't joke about such things," I replied. He always had feelings for Susan, and he decided to take a chance and make a move, thinking he had nothing to lose. I'm not sure if my mother and sister knew about his intentions in advance, but they definitely supported him, I clarified. "She's too smart to be convinced of such nonsense," my father-in-law complained. "I'm sorry that we raised a daughter who behaves like this, Jeff. I am genuinely surprised. Yes, I can't stand this kind of behavior, and I don't think I'll ever be able to trust her again," I confirmed. "As soon as she arrives, I will hand her the divorce papers." I held out until Susan's plane took off so my relatives couldn't warn her. Their swearing wouldn't have served as a warning anyway. I wanted Susan to be as stunned as I was by her betrayal. She should already know that I can be vindictive, and I plan to make her pay for it many times over. Her lack of communication for 2 weeks after my discovery did not come as a shock to me. She knew perfectly well that empty apologies would only make the situation worse. Instead, she knew that the most effective way to calm my anger was to physically be next to me, lying in our bed wrapped in her comforting embrace. Although this strategy had worked before, this time it was different. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was a betrayal. As always, I was waiting for her when she came out, but this time there were no hugs and kisses. It was clear from her surprised face that she was not ready for what was about to happen. A young man approached her and handed her an envelope with documents. "After all these years, you couldn't even do it alone at home," she whispered. "After you couldn't even tell me honestly about your infidelity, forcing me to find out about it myself? You're lucky that I didn't go to extreme measures when I caught you together. But none of you are worth me going to jail. He will soon meet his fate, and as for you, you will remain only a painful memory, which I hope to bury deep in my mind as an annoying mistake in time." Tears silently flowed down her face as she tried to contain her emotions in public. Without thinking, I took a napkin out of my pocket and handed it to her. The trip home was mostly in silence, which was fine with me. When we arrived at the house, she couldn't resist asking who knew about her actions. She admitted that she was just talking too much, and I couldn't help but laugh, which only seemed to upset her. "The kids and your parents are aware now, and they're not happy about it. My family already knew, except for Ronnie. When I told him about his wife's involvement, my brother-in-law was furious. Their marriage is now in jeopardy because he is furious that she supported my wife's heartless betrayal of me." Although I tried to be diplomatic in my words, he expressed his anger much more sharply. "The positive thing for you is that my parents still consider your act incredibly kind. Of course they do. Their preference for another son has never been unnoticeable. I wish I was the one dealing with mortality." "Don't say that, Jeff," she said. "They take care of you." "I know," I added, "almost as much as they love Wayne." When we returned home, the children greeted Susan with only a hint of excitement. She was upset by their lack of enthusiasm for her return. If I hadn't convinced the children to show respect to Susan, she would have been heartbroken. Later that evening, Susan's parents called and were annoyed. Turning on the speakerphone, we all heard her mother say a derogatory word to her. Susan quickly turned off the speakerphone and left the room. Grandma was furious because I had never heard her use such expressions before. Marianne commented on this immediately after Susan left the room. Susan's face was red with anger when she returned to the room after the phone conversation. The children felt the tension and quietly left, leaving us in awkward silence. After a few minutes, Susan finally spoke. "Do you really think that a divorce so suddenly, Jeff, is the best solution?" She hesitated, her voice breaking when she mentioned a matter we hadn't discussed yet. "I've known about your relationship with my brother for a long time, and I've been more than kind. But I doubt you didn't even think about your actions when you lived with him those 2 weeks after I found out," I hastily replied. Her face contorted in annoyance, which further reinforced my doubts. "He's not okay, Jeff. He doesn't have much time left. I'm just trying to help," she meekly defended herself. "Are you going to start sleeping with other terminally ill people? I'm sure it will bring happiness to many," I asked sarcastically. "I see in you a woman who used this situation as an excuse to be with my brother," I replied sarcastically. She pursed her lips, her eyes flashing with anger when I met her gaze. We gave each other innocence, Jeff. Remember, you're the only man I've ever been with. Have you ever thought about being with another woman? She confessed, finally being honest. I thought about it, but in the end, I didn't do anything because I'm committed to our marriage. I love you. I made you promises, and I'm going to keep them. I've only ever been happy with you, I said. I could see that she was uncomfortable and I could feel her inner conflict as she searched for an answer. He's leaving soon. Only our families know about what happened. No one else should know about this, Susan complained. I don't think I can just stop, Jeff, she said, justifying her actions. He doesn't have much time left. That's probably the worst thing you could say, Susan. Even if you promised never to be with him again, our chances of reconciliation would be slim, I added. So now we're haggling? You want to keep sleeping with my damn brother until he dies and then reunite with me, pretend that nothing happened, and live happily ever after? Now you're trying to bargain for extra time from him. You are either very trusting or shamelessly unfaithful. I don't care that he's in critical condition, our marriage is falling apart. That should be your priority. But it doesn't seem to matter to you, because at the end of your 2-week visit home, you returned to California as if nothing else mattered. I didn't ask any questions and you didn't talk about it yourself, but I assumed that you were still dating my brother despite his rapidly deteriorating health. Despite the fact that Susan and the children kept in touch regularly, my conversations with Susan were limited to about once a week. During these conversations, she casually mentioned his deteriorating health and her imminent return, which I preferred not to pay attention to. But when she called a week before her return, the tone of her conversation seemed strange to me and suggested that Wayne's health was rapidly deteriorating. And then she dropped a bombshell. She's pregnant, she whispered almost inaudibly. Her words barely reached my ears, but they still made an impression. I thought for a moment before replying. This is a difficult situation, Susan. What? She snapped. I explained, the judge can postpone the divorce until the child is born. No, he won't do that, she insisted. The child is not yours, so this should not affect the divorce process. I can say it's yours, she offered. I warned her that lying in court is perjury and can lead to serious consequences. In addition, DNA tests can distinguish close relatives after a few months of pregnancy. On the other hand, your child may inherit most of his property, I added. I made it clear that I would not be responsible for the child, only for Marianne and Will. We agreed to divide our property equally, and she would receive alimony. But unless my brother has more savings than I expected, in a few years you may have to look for a job, unless my parents decide to help you because you will give them another grandson, the only one from Wayne. After the children decided to live with me, the judge allocated me the house until the youngest child graduated from college. Susan's lawyer was upset, but the judge seemed to take into account Susan's infidelity, even though we lived in a no-fault state. The divorce was formalized 6 months later. Wayne's death exacerbated the worries of Susan and our parents. I decided not to attend the funeral, knowing that I could take revenge. Almost 2 months later, Susan gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom my children happily shared with me. They warmly welcomed their new stepbrother, knowing about my boundaries. I will not harm the child, but I will not enter into the role of his late father. I made the decision to cut my parents out of my life after they supported my ex-wife, Susan, who moved in with them after the birth of the child. Despite the fact that Susan got a part-time job and my parents helped take care of the child, I felt that their actions went against my boundaries. Although they advised me to accept the situation and move forward, I decided it was better to distance myself from them. I cut off all communication with my family members by blocking their numbers and avoiding family meetings. The only people I kept in touch with were Ronnie and Diana, but on the condition that they promised not to disclose my whereabouts or activities to my parents or ex-wife. It wasn't easy for my sister, but Ronnie made it clear that he would leave her if she didn't agree to keep my secrets. Knowing that her marriage was in a fragile state, Diana chose to keep her thoughts to herself. My children were sympathetic to my choice and never objected to my absence from family events. We often celebrated holidays and birthdays a day or two later than the rest of the family. The only times I made exceptions were my children's weddings. I assured them both that I would not let my ex-wife or previous family members stop me from attending important events for them. I left it to them to convey to the rest of the family that I would not tolerate disrespect. I swore an oath to my children that I would not spoil their weddings. When my daughter got married 6 years after the divorce, I proudly walked her down the aisle and then sat next to my ex-wife on the bride's side in the front row. Susan tried to take my hand, but I quickly pulled away, making my feelings clear. Marianne ordered me to sit with family friends, not at the main table. The news of my divorce from Susan due to her infidelity had already spread, so there was no need to discuss the details again. We all had a good time at the table, and I tried to communicate and fulfill my duties as the host of the event, considering that I was the one who paid for everything. During the event, I made sure to visit every table, including going to the family table to thank them for coming. While expressing my gratitude, I noticed that my ex-wife and parents were looking at me strangely, after which I quickly moved on. Throughout the evening, I danced with every woman at my table and several others, with Susan glancing in my direction from time to time. Although I had not planned to ask her to dance, in the end, Marianne asked why I didn't ask our mother to dance. "No, dear, I won't invite her." "I'm sorry, but I'm not interested." "Let's not spoil the evening," I replied. I saw Marianne thinking about the situation. Maybe she wanted to push the issue but in the end decided not to. She went up to her mother and spoke to her, shaking her head. Susan looked at me with tears in her eyes. 2 years later, I didn't pay for my son's wedding. Instead, he discussed his family situation with his future in-laws. I was sitting at a table with friends and listening to him talk about what he had to explain to his fiancée's parents. At first, this story disgusted me, but in the end, they showed understanding. Susan, on the other hand, felt insulted that our son had dragged her into this case and threatened to skip the event. I felt proud when Will told her that he would miss her at the wedding but didn't apologize for being frank. "It's not my fault, Mom," I heard him say on the phone. "You've made your decisions, I'm just delivering the message." Involuntarily, he had to meet with Amy's parents and admit that his mother had an affair with his father's brother. It was extremely embarrassing. 12 years after the divorce, I found myself sitting in my favorite pub on a Friday night, savoring a glass of Glenlivet. After the divorce, I tried dating, but no one could fill the void that Susan left in my heart. I couldn't deny it, I was really in love with her, and her betrayal hurt me to the core. To be honest, I still had lingering feelings for her. Despite this, I found solace in not allowing myself to fall into destructive behaviors such as alcoholism or mindless romances. I focused on my job, the friends who supported me, and the new hobbies I took up after the divorce. The life I had with Susan was different, but the one I was living now wasn't bad either. I didn't pay attention to the man sitting next to me until he held out his hand to me. He introduced himself as Melvin Downey, and I shook his hand in return. "Yes, I know who you are." "You are Susan's first husband," he said in a friendly tone. I giggled, feeling a sense of camaraderie with him. Maybe I can really find common ground with this guy, I thought. "I hope we don't have to share the heartache too," I replied. I didn't know that Susan had remarried. My children mentioned that she was dating someone, but they didn't tell me about the marriage. "They probably didn't want to upset you," he suggested. "Yes, they are so considerate," I agreed. "Can I ask you something?" he asked nervously. "Of course," I replied. I watched as beads of sweat appeared on his forehead and his expression filled with anxiety. "Do you think she'll cheat on me too?" "Do you believe in the saying once a cheater, always a cheater?" he asked. At first, I thought about leaving him in the lurch because Susan's actions were not my problem, but I decided to reassure him. "No, I don't believe in that saying. I think Susan will try to be a good wife to you." I definitely brought up the topic of her behavior, knowing that she wouldn't want to appear indecently in front of our children again. He thanked me sincerely, seemingly oblivious to the soft sigh that escaped him. I realized that I liked him. "Do you come here often?" he asked. "Yes, I usually come here on Friday evenings." "It's a nice, quiet place with friendly people," I replied. "Is it okay if I come in from time to time, just to chat, nothing more?" he offered, which I gladly accepted. Over time, Melvin and I developed a strong friendship. We often met at the bar and sometimes played golf together. Our bond became even stronger when we made a pact never to talk about a certain woman we both knew. When she asked Melvin if I had ever mentioned her and he said no, it infuriated her. He thought it was funny and teased me for weeks about it. I thought Melvin was exaggerating until I bumped into Susan during lunch at Applebee's. While I was savoring my burger, Susan sat down at my table with an angry and uninvited look. "Well, Susan, make yourself comfortable," I quipped when she sat down. "What's going on, Jeff? My husband thinks you're wonderful, but you never show up at the family parties I attend except for the kids' weddings. Everyone understands everything now, Jeff. You've made it clear that I'm the problem. I made a mistake, Jeff. I can't fix it. All I can do is apologize," she lamented. "That's the problem, Susan. Some things cannot be erased so easily with a simple apology." I never saw Susan again, but I often spent time with Melvin. One day, he came to the bar very drunk and angry. I immediately understood what was going on, and I was right. He found Susan and her lover in their marital bed, and a terrible thing happened. When Melvin caught her with the young guy, the young lover started running away, and Melvin chased him in desperation. Susan ran after her husband and dashed out onto the roadway, ignoring the traffic. Fate was not kind to Susan. She was hit by a car moving at high speed. Susan died from multiple injuries. When Melvin told me everything that had happened, my heart began to beat at a breakneck pace, and my vision blurred. My only true love in life had died. That's all for today, my friend. Do you think the cheaters got what they deserved, or did they get away with it?